I got the invitation to go on this Armed Lutheran Radio show, though. You know this guy? Have you seen this? There's two things that I would like to say that make me feel safe. Number one, the fact that there is a radio show called the Armed Lutheran Podcast somewhere in the world. That makes me feel safer.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. This is a podcast about faith, firearms, and freedom. We talk about guns, hunting, competition, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about guns and gun rights. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode 72, brought to you by Cook's Holsters, American-made custom Kydex holsters with a 100% satisfaction guarantee and a lifetime warranty. www.cooksholsters.com. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week again this week. We are so happy to have you with us. As you are listening to this episode, Sergeant Bill and Aaron Israel and I will be recovering from shooting the Texas State IDPA Championship, which was held today on the 28th of May. 2017. Last week, Sergeant Bill and I were in Arkansas for the Arkansas State Championship and had not such a great match, although Sergeant Bill had a terrific match. We started out, did not do very well on the opening stage, probably the first couple of stages, and then Bill turned it on and had a fantastic match. He ended up winning first place CCP expert, and he was division champion in CCP. So congratulations to Sergeant Bill with another win for him. That was fantastic. I shot a good match after the first four stages, but my Glock 34 just wouldn't fit in the IDPA box. The back of the Zev Magwell was just a shade, maybe a quarter of an inch or an eighth of an inch too big, and it wouldn't fit in the box, and I got DQ'd. So I then went on to shoot a fantastic match. I finished the match 4 points down per stage and was 2.2 points down per stage for the final 8. But it didn't count. They let me continue shooting. Thank goodness it was not a safety disqualification, so I was allowed to continue shooting. And so I ended up being listed as division champion in the not for competition division. Oh, well, I just chalked it up as, once I got DQ'd, I just chalked it up as practice for Texas State this weekend and just had a good time. It was fun, great people. It was good seeing old friends and being able to, anytime you're around great people and you're able to get out and shoot and have fun, it can't be all bad. So I just tried to keep a good attitude about it and had a good time. It was still fun. And Cook's Holsters was sponsoring the match. We gave away some swag and some gift certificates, and so that was nice. We're doing that again in June. On June 10th, the Oklahoma State Championship is going to be sponsored by Cook's Holsters as well. Looking forward to that. And of course, we'll talk more about how things went at Texas State in next week's show. Today's show is a bit of a Debbie Downer. We've got, of course, Memorial Day is tomorrow. Many of you will be downloading and listening to this on Memorial Day. But the main theme for the show is suicide. We lost one of our strongest voices in the gun rights community, Bob Owens, the editor of bearingarms.com, took his own life on May 8th. And we'll be sharing some thoughts about that today. We'll be talking a little bit about the Christian perspective on suicide in our Clinging to God and Guns segment with Pastor Bennett a little bit later. Stay tuned. I hope you'll stick around and listen, and I hope what we have to offer here for you today is helpful. If you have questions, or if you would like more information, we'll have lots of resources listed on the website in the show notes for episode 72. So stick around. We've got a lot of important information coming your way right after this, right here on Armed Lutheran Radio.
Well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
With those words, our founding fathers changed the world. They launched an experiment in freedom, where common lawful citizens are free to speak and gather and worship as they choose. But first among those freedoms is the one freedom that makes the rest possible. For 130 years, we've worked to preserve freedom first. I'm Wayne LaPierre of the National Rifle Association.
On May 8th, the gun rights community lost one of its strongest voices. Bob Owens, a fellow North Carolinian and the editor of BearingArms.com, took his own life near his home near Fuquay, Varina, North Carolina. The morning of his death, he left a message on Facebook foreshadowing his intentions. In the end, Bob said, "It turns out that I'm not strong. I'm a coward and a selfish son of a bitch. I'm sorry." By midday, I received a message from Aaron Israel asking if I'd heard the news. Nobody saw it coming. He posted the day before that he had 3 days to finish a book, and the tone of that message was more of can-do spirit. 3 more days, 10,000 pages, let's do this. Others saw him and who spent time with him just a week before at NRA annual meetings in Atlanta. Owens, 2 years my junior, leaves behind a wife and 2 daughters, ages 9 and 17. I never met Bob. I reached out to him for interviews a couple of times, but never got any response. I always had a great deal of respect for Bob and his work. He was a North Carolina boy who made it big, writing about guns. I respected and admired him for his hard work, his sharp mind, his unflappable attitude in combating the lies and distractions of the anti-gun left. He was fearless, willing to engage the anti-gun crowd in fierce debates, never backing down from a fight. And as much as I detest the soulless scumbags in the anti-gun movement who were gloating over his death, their posts are a testament to just how much they hated him, how much they feared him, and how effective he was. He knew his stuff. He spent hundreds of hours getting training that you and I could only dream of receiving. He wrote prolifically. He read and he studied the pro-gun and anti-gun movement's greatest writers. He broke down dash cam video and crime scene evidence to counter the violent anti-cop movement in America, earning him no small share of haters on the left. He was one of the most knowledgeable and effective voices of the pro-gun movement, and in an instant, he was gone. As Jen Jakes wrote the day afterward, "We are diminished. We are indeed diminished by his loss." Reach out to those you love. Let them know that you care. Let them know that God loves them. Turn to God's word for guidance and strength. Talk to a friend or a loved one. Your death is not going to end the pain. It will only transfer it to those you love and leave behind. Remember, no matter how low you feel, Jesus Christ died for your sins. He loves you. Through suffering, we are built up. God in his purpose has ordained before the time of the world by what crosses and sufferings he would conform every one of his elect to the image of his Son. I don't know what Bob's faith was like. I don't know if he was a believer. But I hope you'll keep his family, his children, his wife, and his 2 daughters in your prayers. A GoFundMe campaign has been established to help pay the bills for his 2 young children, one of whom is very near college age. I would encourage you to look it up and donate if you are so inclined. Look for a link in today's show notes. It's Armed Lutheran Radio episode 72. We'll be right back with more right here on Armed Lutheran Radio.
The percentage of women who own guns is growing. American women are more knowledgeable and better equipped to defend themselves than ever before. So, why is it that every time I go to a gun shop, I feel like they're talking down to me? Like, hey little lady, let me show you what you need. It's like all they want to do is sell me a pink gun. If you're tired of feeling that too, visit Guns for Gals, a specialty firearms boutique designed to empower women with information about firearm safety and to equip them with the means to protect themselves. The owners go out of their way to find products specifically for women, and they actually listen and ask questions to help you find the right products to meet your needs. If they wouldn't own it themselves, they won't sell it. Guns for Gals is located at 2035 Central Circle, Suite 108 in McKinney, Texas. Open Monday 1 to 6 and Tuesday through Thursday 11 to 7. And on weekends, you can find them at a gun show near you. Or shop online at www.gunsforgals.com. Guns for Gals, more than just a gun shop. It's how gun shopping should be.
Up next, it's Mia's Motivations with Mia Anstine.
Hey everybody, I'm glad to be here for another week, but this week we have a very serious topic that is very important that we want to share with you, and I have mentioned this before, but suicide is on the rise. And I've researched and looked at the Center for Disease Control, the CDC. I've looked at a report and a study that they did from 1999 through 2014. And this was a study on both men and women from the ages of 10 years old to 74 years old. In this study, they found that men are 3 times more likely to take their lives than women. And during the study period, they also found that the suicide rates for women was the greatest for those aged 10 to 14 years old. And that is very significant because those adolescent years are very formative and we really need to be there for our children. The study showed that their rate of increase was 200% during that time period. So children are really important. We need to look at them. This was for young women. And for men, those aged 45 to 64, they had the largest increase. The adolescent girls and then the middle-aged men, they have a lot of stress in their lives. We need to be aware of risks that they are coming in contact with. We need to notice the warning signs and we need to be aware so that we can hopefully stop the suicides before they happen. Overall, suicide rates are highest among men 75 and over. And this was in the overall report, not in the increase, but the overall suicides, 75 and up for men is the highest. This number, I believe, is going to increase because more and more states are implementing what Colorado implemented last November. In the state which I reside, Colorado, they formally legalized physician-assisted suicide with the passing of Proposition 106 last year. Also, the majority of suicides are attributed to suffocation, which includes hanging and strangulation. And the percentages of suicides attributed to firearms and poisoning, they decreased during this study period. So I won't say that it's good news, but it is good news for firearms and for our rights because as most gun owners know, the anti-gun people use suicide rates in numbers to try and take away our gun rights. So during the 1999 to 2014 period, firearm suicides actually did decline. So talking about this, I want to talk about what we can do to prevent suicide. And number 1 is call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. That number is 1-800-273-8255. Whether you yourself are feeling the need or desire to take your life, or if it's somebody that you're concerned about, they can help you. They can talk to you. They can give you tips and walk you through it. But also, back in episode 63, I mentioned the National Shooting Sports Foundation and their mission to help prevent suicide. I want to share, again, the tips that they gave. One thing they shared are ways that we can recognize the risks. And even though we are not licensed psychologists, the NSSF indicated that we should always know these signs. So 1 is someone talking about or wanting to die. Someone looking for a way to kill themselves. Somebody talking about feeling hopeless or having no purpose. somebody talking about feeling trapped or in unbearable pain, somebody talking about being a burden to others, increasing their use of alcohol or drugs, someone acting anxious, agitated, or reckless, someone sleeping too little or sleeping too much, so basically a change in their sleep habits, someone withdrawing or feeling isolated, showing rage or talking about seeking revenge on someone else, or just simply displaying extreme mood swings. Those are all signs and would show that somebody is at risk of taking their life. They also indicated that the more of the signs that these people show, the greater the risk. So warning signs associated with suicide, but they may not be the causes of suicide. If you think someone you know may be at risk, here is what they also suggest you can do. As I mentioned, call the National Suicide Prevention Line. Or if someone you know shows these warning signs, don't leave them alone. Stay with them. Be there for them. On another note, remove any firearms, alcohol, drugs, including prescription drugs. Also remove sharp objects. And in not leaving them alone, as I mentioned, suffocation is a huge cause of suicide. Don't leave them alone. Stay there with them. Be there for them. I also want to talk about something that some fellow friends of mine have mentioned, other mothers have mentioned to me. They've talked about a show that's on TV now, and it's called 13 Reasons Why. And this is a series that's based on a novel, and it's about a young lady who goes through these series of reasons of why she, in the end, kills herself. And I mention this because, as I said, teen or adolescent suicide rates in young women are increasing, but it's also increasing in young men. It's just not as high a rate as the girls. But the concern that I've learned of from other mothers is that this series is on Netflix, and if you're allowing your children to watch this series without you, if you don't have good communication with your adolescent, then they may be interpreting this series wrong. The series was actually released in an attempt to bring suicide awareness, not to bring reasons for suicide, even though that's kind of what the title says. So be aware of what your children are watching. Have talks with them. Something that I found a great way to communicate with your child is in a vehicle with no cell phones on. You're both facing away from each other. It's a non-confrontational situation where you can chat without being intimidating to your youngster. That's one way to communicate. And also just simply asking them how their day was when they come home. And a traditional answer is fine or good or whatever, a simple one-line answer. As a parent, you should take the time to delve in and ask more questions. Ask some open-ended questions and really find out how their day was. If we're doing our jobs and doing prayer at home, then that's another time where we can pray about these things and offer that to your child as a way to deal with some of these scenarios. If you have other tips or things that you've learned in dealing with this, I would love to hear about them. You can message me on my Facebook page. It's facebook.com/Mia Anstines with an S at the end. So that's MIAANSTINES. I would like to know about some things that you've learned and ways that you have coped with this. My teenager, she just graduated high school. We have a great form of communication. We are pretty open with that, and I feel very fortunate because I know not every parent is. So I hope to have something more cheery to talk to you about next week, and I hope that everybody can be aware. And again, I want to give you that suicide prevention hotline one more time. It's 1-800-273-8255. I'll be chatting with you next week. Bye.
You can read more from Mia and watch her YouTube videos at miaanstine.com.
As many of you know, Sergeant Bill and I are competitive shooters. We're also reloaders. Bill helped me to get started last year, but I've still got a lot to learn. One thing I do know, though, you need a good source for supplies and components. So let me tell you about U.S. Reloading Supply. Yeah, there are bigger suppliers out there, but what sets U.S. Reloading Supply apart from the rest is their dedication to customer satisfaction. Check them out at usreloadingsupply.com. They carry the top name brands like Starline, Rainier, Barry's, Remington, Spear, and Hornady. If you've got a special order like primers and powder that you don't see on their website, give them a call for a quote. I did and got a great price. Excellent customer service, fast delivery, prices that include shipping, and a promise to match or beat any retailer's price, including shipping. Call them today, 941-451-7357, or visit them today at usreloadingsupply.com and use the promo code Lutheran2017 to save 10% off your order. usreloadingsupply.com.
Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Silvia.
Hey, this is Sergeant Bill. In lieu of today's Ballistic Minute, I'd like to talk about taking care of yourself. Everybody has problems, everybody has issues. No matter how big they seem, you can always work on them. Things can always get better. Taking your own life is never the answer, because all it's going to do is cause more problems for everyone around you. My best friend that I used to shoot with, I used to work with, and used to ride motorcycles with 4 or 5 years ago, took his own life. And it's never the answer. I mean, it's kind of thing that, I every day question, why was his life so bad that he felt he had to do that? Why didn't he talk to me? Why didn't he, seek out help? We were best friends. He could talk to me about anything. We did talk about anything and everything. If you feel down, if you feel like life is horrible, always find someone. Even if it's not a family or a friend, somebody that you can trust or you feel like you can open up to. There's counselors, there's suicide hotlines, there's stuff that you can do, people you can talk to and get help. There's no shame in asking for help. The only shame is in not asking for help when you need it. Take care of yourself. I'm Sergeant Bill, and this was not a Ballistic Minute.
Sergeant Bill Silvia is a 15-year veteran of the Dallas Police Department and masterclass competitive shooter. You can watch Sergeant Bill's shooting videos at armedlutheran.us/Sergeant Bill.
If you feel desperate or alone, help is here.
Call the Lifeline and talk with a trained crisis counselor who can help you find your way back to a healthier, happier life.
With help comes hope. So call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, day or night, at 1-800-273-TALK.
That's 1-800-273-8255.
So you have your concealed carry permit or license to carry. Now what? Now you need a good holster. Not one of those cheap neoprene prophylactic holsters you can buy in the big box stores. You need a holster custom built for the firearm you intend to carry every day. Check out cooksholsters.com. Made in the USA, Cooks holsters are available in a wide range of colors and designs for inside the waistband or outside waistband carry. They carry a lifetime warranty against defects and a 100% satisfaction guaranteed. Visit www.cooksholsters.com and use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST and take 15% off everything in the store. You put in the time and effort to legally carry a firearm for personal protection. Protect your firearm with a custom holster from cooksholsters.com.
Up next, we're clinging to God and guns with Pastor John Bennett.
Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. Time now for another episode of Clinging to God and Guns with our friend Pastor John Bennett. John is the pastor of St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. Welcome back, Pastor. It's been way too long.
Yes, it has, but it is good to be back with you.
Well, it's great to be back with you as well. Unfortunately, we don't have a very happy subject to discuss today. As a result of the death of Bob Owens, which I mentioned earlier in the show, the subject that we want to discuss today is suicide. And suicide being the 10th leading cause of death in America. 120 people take their own lives every day. 7 out of 10 of those are men. 2/3 of them use a gun. As Christians, we recognize that life is a gift from God, and it's a tragedy anytime a person values their life so little that they want to end it. It would appear that Bob, like many Americans, suffered from some sort of depression. His final message was replied to by his wife, Christine, saying, "You were never a coward or selfish, just hurting." So obviously, he was going through a lot of pain that those around him simply didn't see. Many of those who are suffering from depression become very good at hiding it. I wanted to read just a quick passage from a book I found. Pastor Todd Peppercorn has a book, I Trust When Dark My Road, and he writes about his own depression. True clinical depression is not simply a blue mood or a bad day at the office from which one rebounds with the dawning of a new day. Depression creeps into every pore of one's life, depriving otherwise nice and normal people of hope, joy, and love. Depression veritably seems to let the helium out of the balloon of life, often insidiously, until souls are left bereft of any capacity or desire to take on even the most fundamental requirements of daily living. Depression must surely be a first cousin to hell on earth, for in the midst of suffering, the soul often feels hopeless and separated from God.
Yeah, absolutely. He was prompted to write his book because of his own deep struggles with depression, and he was ready to take his own life. It happened on a Good Friday, and rather than take his life as he was ready to do, he took the step to talk to another pastor. Leading up to this, with his bouts of depression, he was on disability. He was only serving part-time under another pastor because the depression had become so severe that it made it impossible for him to perform his duties as a pastor. And then he got a call one day on a Good Friday that his disability insurance had been denied. And here's another quote from the book, just to give your listeners an idea of just how deeply depression affects a person. As I got ready for the day's events on Good Friday, 2 months into disability, my grip on reality was fragile but holding. I could function most days for a few hours as long as I poured everything I had into that time. Writing sermons had stopped months before. Making calls was gone. I couldn't take the people. And that's one thing that's also very important to note. If you know anyone that struggles with depression, they develop an inability to function with other people. You'll notice that they become withdrawn when they do have to interact. They're very short-tempered. Just the littlest things can set them off. They will they'll go to great lengths to try to avoid being around people, even their own family members that they live with.
Right.
So he goes on, greeting people after church was torture. Yet somehow I had come to believe that I could still get through all of this, keep working, be a husband and father, and hang together. Then the phone rang. And that's when he got the call from the insurance company that, I'm sorry, we don't think you're disabled anymore. We're denying your disability as of 2 months ago. Yes. So then he hangs up. I was numb. I mumbled some response and hung up the phone. My wife asked what had happened. I think I told her. I sat and stared at the computer for what seemed like a lifetime. My future was draining out of me like blood from a cut artery. There was nothing I could do. This was beyond my control. There was no way I could get better if I had to work full-time. I wasn't really getting better, even working part-time. The thought of the yoke of the pastoral office being thrust upon me again, against my will, loomed before me. I slept. I stared at the wall. Somehow I got up. I called my therapist and left a message. Like a walking dead man, I moved about our house, oblivious to my wife, our young children, the telephone, everything. What I was searching for I couldn't find. I needed hope, a future, a reason to live. I couldn't see past my own misery and pain. I wanted it gone, really gone. I couldn't wait for some magical drug or therapeutic insight to flip a switch and make things right. The darkness had taken me. It was only a matter of time.
That's amazing. And that moment, whatever that moment was for Bob Owens, obviously happened very suddenly, and that's very common for those suffering from depression and for those who take that final step and in their own lives. They may seem perfectly normal, or they may sort of struggle and internalize it all and keep it all in so nobody notices, and then suddenly there's one thing that sort of pushes them over the edge, and we'll never know what it was for Bob.
Yeah, and there's two kinds of depression too. That there's the depression that's brought on by circumstances in life. There's the acute clinical depression where a person struggles with deep depression regardless of what steps are taken to try and combat it. And then when those circumstances in life that cause your normal person to go through a period of depression, those are the things that trigger them into deeper depression, contemplating suicide, and for many, taking that final step and ending their life. And, you had asked about biblical pictures of depression. I think one of the most obvious is Job. That here is a man who had everything taken from him. He lay down in the ashes, scraping the boils from his skin with pottery shards. His friends tried to console him. His wife even says, "Curse God and die." We've heard of suicide by cop. That would be suicide by God, I guess.
Right.
He's had everything taken from him. But he at the same time is also a picture of faith. Where do we turn to in these moments of where we are in such desperate circumstances that we see our life as no longer worth anything, where we're willing to end it all? And one thing that going back, you think back to when Robin Williams committed suicide, and how there was a lot of commentators saying that, well, he did the ultimate act of selfishness. And while on the surface that's true, when you're looking at it from the perspective of the person who's suffering from depression, to them, it's not selfish, because they see themselves as a burden on everyone else around them, that they are acutely aware of just how troubled they are and how difficult life is for them. And I think they rationalize it away. They say, maybe if I wasn't around, they'd be happier too. And that very well might have been where Bob Owens was at. I like to say that everyone wears a mask. When people are struggling and suffering, what we see is only a minute fraction of what they are enduring. And when it comes to things like depression, even though the mental health profession has really caught up, it used to be there was this massive stigma with seeing a psychologist, that there was something wrong with you. And indeed there is, but there's no longer, I think, that stigma attached to it like it used to be. But even then, there's still embarrassment, shame, all these feelings that prevent a person from taking that step and getting the help that they need.
I think there's still a lot of that, especially among people who are in certain lines of work, like a pastor, like a police officer, or someone who's served in the military. They don't want to appear weak. They don't want to. They'll avoid treatment in fear that it might hurt their careers. People around them will think less of them, or think that there's some weakness there, or some lack of faith if you're a Christian, or if you're a pastor. For gun owners, there's the fear that seeking help will ultimately lead to a loss of your rights. And all of those fears, I think, depending on the person's situation, will prevent people from seeking the help that they really need.
Yeah, we even though we've kind of taken the stigma away from getting help, because the estimates are that 10% of Americans get treatment for depression and other mood-related illnesses. There still is this characterization that, especially with men, you mentioned that suicide is much higher among men than women, that men are supposed to be strong and stoic. They're supposed to be the stable ones in a relationship. They're supposed to be the protectors, the providers, and so forth. And, even though society has gone completely insane with all this gender garbage, we still have a lot of expectations of men. And what happens to a man when suddenly he finds himself in a place in life where he feels like less than a man because he no longer is that strong, stoic individual, where he's weakened by the demons that are afflicting his life?
There was another quote from Pastor Peppercorn that sort of spoke to this, and especially talking about as Christians, although Christians are willing to acknowledge that illness and tragedy can befall God's children, many are less charitable about characterizing depression as legitimate, biologically based illness. Sadly, clinical depression is often misunderstood as a character flaw, a deficit of will, or an absence of sufficient faith.
Yeah, I came from a difficult home life growing up, and to this day, I really don't have a very good relationship with my parents because of it. I've gone through my own bouts of depression, just dealing with the reality of that. I tried to pretend like everything was fine growing up until about 10 years ago. I realized how much I was struggling with it, where I was abused on a almost daily basis physically. And but I was, to my mother, psychology is the devil's science. That everything is explained away in spiritual terms. Your faith isn't strong enough. You're not praying enough. You're not spending enough time in Scripture. And that isn't that's a very common perception among many Christians, that they ignore the mental health profession and they try and explain everything away by spiritual means. And you can't always do that. Just like you can't explain away your heart disease by spiritual means, neither can you explain away your mental illness by spiritual means.
Well, and it's compounded too in our culture, or in Christian thought and Christian writing, about Christian attitudes towards, over the centuries, Christian attitudes towards suicide. So, there's a lot of myths out there, a lot of things that have been written and said. Augustine and a number of the church fathers wrote about it. It goes way back. Is suicide? First off, let's kind of address some of those things for people who are curious. Is suicide a sin?
Yes, absolutely. The taking of any life is sin. When you take life, you are putting yourself in the place of God, who created life. God is the only one who has the right to take away life, except for those circumstances where he has given that authority to the state. So yes, it is a sin for someone to kill oneself. And I think where you're going with this is it a quote-unquote mortal sin?
Is it the unforgivable sin?
Absolutely not. And I think where some of this comes from is that, people take a look at the example of Judas. After Judas betrayed our Lord, he tried to return the money. He was rejected by the Sanhedrin, and he goes out and hangs himself. And it says, as a fulfillment of prophecy, that none of them are lost except for the son of perdition. I'm very grossly paraphrasing that. So there's been this idea that, because Judas died by suicide, and it says that he was condemned to hell for it, then therefore everyone who commits suicide is condemned to hell. Well, we can't take a look at things that way, because then you say, there's two thieves on the cross and one of them went to hell. Well, does that mean that every murderer goes to hell then? No. So yes, it's a sin, but no, I don't believe it's a mortal sin. The Scriptures don't say anywhere that he who commits suicide is eternally damned. The Roman Catholic Church has not changed their position on suicide. Suicide is still considered a mortal sin by the Catholic Church, but thankfully, in recent years, some dioceses have taken a different stance on suicide, where they take more of a stance of compassion, especially for the surviving family members. But it used to be that you committed suicide, you couldn't have your funeral in a Catholic church. A Catholic priest wouldn't preside at your burial. You could not be buried in a Catholic cemetery. And it wasn't, just Roman Catholics that had these practices. There was many other Protestant churches that had similar practices, but thanks be to God that we've changed from that as a society, as we continue to learn more about the area of mental illness.
Well, what about that idea? Let's tackle that. Well, since you just brought it up, I was going to ask about it. The idea that you can't have a funeral or be buried in a Christian cemetery or have a funeral in a Christian church. I've seen that written in a number of places or suggested. And how do you respond to that? What are your thoughts on that?
First, you have to consider the circumstances. Was the person a person of faith? The one congregation that I serve, I'm now serving two, but the one, we actually have two cemeteries. And one of the stipulations is that members outside the congregation can be buried at the discretion of the pastor and board of elders. But for anyone else, you have to be a member in good standing of the church, that you have to be a person of faith. So if you had someone who was a complete unbeliever and they commit suicide and their family asks that if they could be buried in the church cemetery, well, let's talk about this. Let's discuss this before we make a decision on these things. But there was a case of a pastor in the Missouri Synod I believe it was about 2 years ago, who committed suicide and left behind a wife and children. And here is a man who had faithfully served his congregation for a number of years, and then this happens. What do you do in cases like that? I've said it's a sin, but it's not an unforgivable sin.
Right.
We have to look at it from, this is a person who was deeply hurting, that their life became so difficult in their own mind that it wasn't just that their life or they would be better off if they were dead. They convinced themselves that everyone else in my life is going to be better off without me around, without me dragging them down. So we approach it from compassion. We try and understand the suffering of the person who has committed suicide. And we also have to show a great deal of compassion for those who grieve. That, even though the suffering of the one who has committed suicide yet departed life in the faith, the suffering for the family members continues for years down the road.
Right. Because we all suffer in different ways, and that's just because the fallen world that we live in. If you're a believer, if you're still in the faith at the time that the despair drives you to that point, you haven't lost your faith at that point. You've lost hope. Yeah, and that's reading in Pastor Peppercorn's book. That's even one of the things that he says is that when he was at the brink of committing suicide, and I'm roughly paraphrasing here, but he said, "I'm going to do this and hope that God will understand." And in cases like that, they're leaning even more so on the grace of God because they don't see any way out except for this, and they know it's a sin, and they are deeply trusting that God's mercy is greater than their sin. What do you make of the idea, I've seen this also bandied about, the idea that suicide, that because the person who actually commits suicide didn't get a chance to repent before they killed themselves, they don't have a chance to go to heaven. They're automatically destined for hell. When as a child, I was taught that by my mother. It's interesting too that one of the proof texts that I've heard to try and defend this notion that
suicide, those who commit suicide are eternally damned, is, it's also one of those favorite verses that we've looked at before of the liberals, that whoever takes the sword will perish by the sword. That I've heard that verse used to argue that those who take their own life will perish eternally. So let's talk for a moment about what repentance means. And this is still fresh in my mind because I just preached on this. The word repent in Greek literally means to have a new mind. As one Greek dictionary defines it, it means to change one's way of life as the result of a complete change of thought and attitude with regard to sin and righteousness. So let's think of that in terms of suicide. Suicide isn't necessarily, you can't make suicide a way of life because you can only do it once. So it's not necessarily a matter of changing one's way of life. We've got this notion that repent means to say, I'm sorry, please forgive me. Well, no, that's not what repentance is. That's contrition. Repentance is to turn away from sin and live life in a different way. When someone is suffering with depression that leads to suicide, depression isn't a sin. Depression is a result of the fall of sin. It is a result of living in a sinful world. When it comes to suicide is a single sin that takes place in a person's life if they take their own life. Can you say that the thoughts of suicide, contemplating suicide, are those sins too? Yes, to a certain degree. But how many sins have you committed, Lloyd, that, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but how many sins have you committed that you have yet to ask for forgiveness?
Well, that's the thing, and that's what I found odd about that idea, was this suggestion that if you don't have a chance to repent before you perish, then, and because we sin every day and we sin in ways that we don't even realize, then pretty much everybody who dies in a car accident, everybody who dies as a result of being killed by some horrible criminal, every police officer who was killed in the line of duty, every soldier who was killed in battle, they were all destined for hell because, using that rationale that you didn't get a chance to repent before your death,
right,
all of those people were bound for hell because they didn't get a chance.
Right.
So the logically, it doesn't make sense because, and I think it that idea stems from this idea that, or this misunderstanding maybe about original sin, and the idea that we sin constantly and don't, in ways that we don't even realize that we're doing it. When we confess on Sunday, I've sinned against you in thought, word, and deed, and we confess that we are sinners even when we don't realize we're doing it. Right.
Yeah, and I think part of this notion is, not that I want to make this the blame Catholicism episode, but it comes from the Catholic notion of last rites, that there, at some point along the way in the history of Roman Catholicism, this notion arrived that if you die without having confessed everything, that your soul will be burdened with those sins as you enter into purgatory. And so with that kind of understanding, that's bled into this general idea that, gosh, well, if you don't say you're sorry for every sin that you've committed and ask for forgiveness, that those sins aren't forgiven. Well, no. If I was not forgiven for those sins that I have not asked for forgiveness, boy, am I screwed. And
right, exactly.
The Small Catechism is helpful in this. On the section on confession, which sins should we confess? Before God we should plead guilty of all sins, even those we are not aware of, as we do in the Lord's Prayer. And forgive us our trespasses. So this notion that, well, suicide leads to eternal damnation because you didn't have a chance to confess that sin as you died. Well, no, because there's a lot of sins that you are going to have not confessed at the moment of your death.
Well, we mentioned earlier how, Pastor Peppercorn writes about this, the people sort of looking at you askance and suspecting that must be just some sort of a character flaw, or maybe you just need to snap out of it, suck it up, cheer up. It's a beautiful day. What have you got to be worried about? And unfortunately, this happens a lot with our church family. Tammy and I, my wife, were talking about some friends that were going through a similar situation. They had some difficulty in their life, and their church family sort of abandoned them and turned their backs and made them feel as though there was something wrong with them. Well, there must be something wrong at home. They must not be good Christians. They must not have strong enough faith. Maybe there's something wrong in their marriage, or they're just not good enough parents. How? And that's especially tragic, because that should be, the church family should be our support network, and we should be there to love and care for one another. How should we, and how can we as Christians respond to the survivors of suicide, particularly those who are members of our own church, but also our extended family and the friends around us? How can we share Christ's love and encouragement in a way that's not cliche?
We have to have compassion. That being said, how do you have compassion for someone? Well, depression is one of those things that you really can't understand it unless you've been through it. I mean, you can understand it from a educational perspective if you've studied it, but only those who have struggled with depression know exactly what it's like. And one recommendation is, if you know someone who's just having a hard time understanding this, get them a copy of Pastor Peppercorn's book. It's available for free. The link's in the show notes. It's a great resource. Hand it to them. Say, you know what? If you're the one suffering with depression, just say, would you mind reading this book for me? This is what my life is like. I just want you to understand so that you can know what I'm going through. It's not as simple as saying pull yourself up by the bootstraps. That doesn't work. A lot of times there is, there's some chemical issues in the brain that cause these things. The body isn't producing enough serotonin, and a lot of times that's what triggers one into clinical depression. At other times there have been some serious life issues that have happened that have led a person to that point. With Pastor Peppercorn, he lost, within a few months' time, his mother, an uncle, and his wife had a miscarriage. And those were the big triggers that he identifies of what led him down the road to depression. Among those, with the loss of their child, they had a memorial service, and they invited members from their congregation, and only 3 people showed up. And where that comes from, and this is based on my own experiences that I've seen as a pastor, is that people are afraid that they're going to say the wrong thing. Sometimes you don't have to say anything. Sometimes all that's needed is for you to put your arm around them and say, if you need to have a good cry, I'm here for you.
Right.
If you need someone just to listen, I'm here for you. And I think in some ways men are worse at this because we're wired so that we want to fix everything. You can't fix suicide. You can't fix someone's depression.
Right.
All that you can do is be that voice of compassion, be that one who comes alongside them and says, I may not understand what you're going through, but I'm here for you.
Yep.
And part of it too is that when someone is going through those very difficult times in life, there's the selfishness in others that says, gosh, I just don't want to be around that. I don't want to be dragged down. Mm-hmm. Again, try and put yourself in their shoes. If that were you, how would you want others to react to your suffering?
Right.
Would you want them to treat it as taboo and try and avoid you altogether so that they didn't have to deal with the ugly reality of your despair? Or would you want them to come alongside you and support you and be with you and cry with you? It's putting ourselves in the other person's shoes is probably the only way that we can begin to understand how to have compassion.
Now, suicide survivors, in addition to obviously grieving for the loss that they've experienced, they often compound the pain by trying to find reasons, right? That they why did this happen to me? Why did my child do this? Why did my loved one do this? And that can lead to anger towards God, anger towards themselves. Often, they're blaming themselves for what happened, for not doing enough, for not seeing the warning signs. What would you say to someone who is blaming themselves or blaming God in the aftermath of a suicide?
It's not your fault, and God understands your grief more than anyone. And while it's not God's fault, He forgives you for blaming Him. God's got broad shoulders; He can take it. If you need to hurl your anger at someone, God can take it, and He forgives you for that. Part of the blame game that takes place is that we like to point the finger at the person who's easiest to blame. It's easy to blame God. It's easy to blame ourselves. But this is the fault of sin and Satan.
Right.
This despair is brought about by the reality of sin in our life. This despair is brought about by the inner workings of Satan, who uses temptation when we are at our weakest to bring us down. The way that, and there isn't a whole lot of theology and resources that we have that we can point to say this is how Satan works. But just to put it in the simplest way I can, he knows where our weaknesses are, and that's where he hits us the hardest. So when you have someone who is struggling with depression and they take their life, try and think of it from that perspective, that this was their weakness and Satan attacked them till they couldn't take it anymore. And if you want to blame God, but at the same time know that He forgives you for that. And know that there is hope and grace to be found in Him. If your loved one was a person of faith, if you're a person of faith, don't despair in your loved one's salvation, because at the end of the day, if they died with their faith in Christ as the crucified and risen Son of God, you don't need to doubt their salvation, because God in His mercy will redeem them. The blood of Christ has already covered their sins. Their sin is not greater than God's mercy.
So if we have loved ones, friends, family, co-workers, church members around us where we see the signs, we suspect or worry that there's something going on that is unspoken, but we can sense that there's an issue. How do we reach out to those people, and what do we do to try to prevent them from taking that last step that Bob ultimately took?
Yeah, earlier I said that everyone wears a mask, and while that's true, the mask that we wear can't cover 100% of what we are dealing with. If you notice those warning signs, a person becoming withdrawn, they reach the point where they can't get out of bed. They're very short-tempered. They're snappy. They're moody. They try and avoid being around others, even their own loved ones. When you start to notice these things, number one, don't be critical, because that will only drive them further into their despair. Because by being critical of this change in their behavior, they add that to the list of one more thing that's wrong with them that could potentially push them over the edge. So don't be critical. You can't force help upon them, but you can be that person that says, I've noticed a change in your behavior and I'm worried about you. Are you doing okay? How can I help you get through this, whatever it is you're going through? Speak of the mercy of Christ, that, whatever this is that you're dealing with, it's not too big for God, that you can get through this, and I'm here to help you through it because I love you and I care about you. Know that you're not alone. For many people that suffer from depression, and many that end up ultimately taking their life, they feel very alone. They can be surrounded by hundreds of people, but they are so narrow in their view on life that they feel that they're very, very alone, that no one understands that there's no hope in this.
If you or anybody you know is suffering please reach out to them. Please get help. We encourage you to talk to a loved one, talk to your pastor, go get help, talk to a doctor, call the suicide prevention hotline. We'll include information and resources for you in the show notes. If you have someone in your family or someone that you love that you're worried about, so that you can get them help.
There is hope for you, that it doesn't have to end in suicide, that God in His mercy will bring you through this. And understand at the same time that when it comes to things like clinical depression, there's a good chance that you may have a lifelong struggle with this. But know that in the midst of your struggle, as St. Paul says, when I am weak, He is strong. In our weakness, God's strength, His mercy, His majesty shows through.
Pastor Bennett, thank you so much for shedding some light on this issue, and I know it's not a fun issue, but it's one that we discuss these numbers, and when we talk about the statistics when it comes to firearms death every year, because the anti-gunners like to lump these numbers in. The fact is that we can't just throw these numbers out and ignore them. There's a tragedy behind every one of those suicides, and they're all preventable. So thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts, and I hope this has been helpful for our listeners.
Thank you. And again, I can't urge your listeners enough. If you're struggling with this, if someone else that you know is struggling with this, please seek help.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org.
And that's going to wrap it up for this week. Thank you all for listening, downloading, and subscribing to the podcast. Be sure to visit the feedback page and leave us a message, an email, or a voicemail if you've got a question or a comment. If you or someone you know or love is suffering from depression or suicidal thoughts, call the Suicide Prevention Hotline at 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255. Come join us again next week for another episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. Until that time, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you then.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and TuneIn. This podcast is made possible by Cook's Holsters and contributions from listeners like you.